Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The letters, as we've mentioned, are going out starting today. We've got two of them. Having the White House promised that at noon today, letters would be going out to our trading partners announcing new tariffs if deals were not in place. We have Japan, we have South Korea, 25% tariffs on both. The president yesterday on his way back into town talked about how more would be going out imminently. Listen.
Sending letters out on Monday having to do with the trade deals. It could be 12, maybe 15. Some will go out on Tuesday and Wednesday, and we've made deals also. So we're going to have a combination of letters, and some deals have been made. I think we'll have most countries done by July 9th. Yeah, either a letter or a deal.
So far, no deals announced today, but yes, two letters have been received by the governments of Japan and South Korea, respectively, and posted on Truth Social. So let's get the latest now live from the White House, where we find Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall. So Tyler, Japan and South Korea, obviously a starting point today, but what else could we see coming down the pike?
Yeah, hey, Kailey. Well, President Trump has said that we could expect 12 to 15 countries to get these letters. And we're sort of watching three different scenarios here that could unfold over the next week. We could see some framework agreements announced, similar to how we saw with Vietnam, for example, President Trump announcing that 20% tariff, though we should note that there were negotiators in Washington over the weekend as they iron that out. Then we could see some of these countries, instead of getting perhaps the letter, they would be given a more tangible extension when it comes to negotiating, since the White House would say that they are negotiating in good faith. And the last bucket would be those countries that could see their tariff rates essentially dictated to them. Perhaps this would be those smaller countries that are already facing that 10% baseline tariff from those Liberation Day levels and aren't really expecting to see much movement going forward there. It is interesting, though, that the two countries that he prioritized to send these letters to are actually two countries that the White House has been prioritizing for talks. Japan and South Korea have long been at the top of the list when it comes to negotiations for multiple reasons, including that the administration has said that they came early and often with concessions to the table, but also because strategically they are geographically close to China. So it's interesting to see here sort of President Trump's frustration with these countries moving forward. Now, we should note that 25% tariff, that's 1 percentage point higher than what Japan was facing on April 2nd, but it is that same level that South Korea was ultimately given. And just for final thoughts on these letters, one, we should watch the transshipment of goods. This seems to be a theme when it comes to the administration saying that they will threaten higher tariffs for those. But then second, also the retaliation. President Trump, Joe and Kailey, writing in these letters that if either of these countries retaliate, he will just tack on their tariff on top of that 25% rate, which means that these levies could keep going up.
Boy. Tyler, it gets to be difficult to understand, or as Bloomberg Politics contributor Rick Davis said earlier, that's because it may not be understandable. But we're now looking at a new deadline of August 1st. Howard Lutnick, who was standing right next to Donald Trump when he made those remarks that we just played on the tarmac from earlier, confirmed that last night. So that is the new deadline?
That does appear to be that they are signaling that while the letters are going out this week, the levies aren't going to be enacted until August 1st, which would give us about a 3-week extension for these countries to make some sort of deal or face these tariff rates that President Trump is outlining. But we should say President Trump in his letter didn't explicitly say that, but that's sort of the indication that we've been getting from other senior administration officials, including Howard Lutnick, as well as the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Now, one that we're watching incredibly closely, of course, is the European Union, a country that at first wasn't being prioritized with the talks, but really seems to have this reversal in favor, with Ursula von der Leyen holding a direct phone call with President Trump last night to talk about perhaps a technical negotiation that we could see moving forward here. So a lot to track, a lot of uncertainty, but one thing's for sure, Joe and Kailey, the administration wants to show some sort of forward progress. It just seems that the situation is pretty fluid.
Well, Tyler, another area in which the administration would like to see forward progress is on a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, something I assume is going to be high on the agenda as President Trump greets the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House today for the third time in 6 months. What should we expect from this evening's visit?
Right, exactly, Kailey. I can tell you that security is incredibly tight here at the White House. It's very difficult to get in anticipation of this visit. Now, there's a few different things on the schedule, including that they will have this bilateral meeting, and then there will be a state dinner later on tonight. Now, the White House, and President Trump in particular, is pushing forward this 60-day ceasefire proposal, but it's meeting some resistance, although Israel has come out saying that it would support it and sent mediators to Qatar over the weekend, for example. So really, they're trying to show some sort of forward progress here when it comes to the negotiations. Perhaps we could get some sort of headlines. We know that the Israeli Prime Minister isn't just meeting with President Trump. He also has scheduled meetings with Steve Witkoff, of course, the special envoy, as well as Secretary of State Marco Rubio later on this afternoon.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live at the White House for us, where we'll be watching this evening's events and, of course, continuing to watch True Social to see if the president posts more letters that he's penned to various countries. Thank you so much. And obviously, while those matters do have the president's attention today, it has the attention of financial markets as well, Joe, as they try to figure out whether or not this is going to be another taco situation. If what was supposed to be a hard deadline of July 9th is now an August 1st deadline. It's a question of what is believable and what is not.
Well, we're taking him seriously, if not literally, I guess, in this case, to see the market sink to lows immediately after those letters went out. You tend to think the market was hoping for news on a framework, not unlike what we saw with Vietnam last week. Even in the absence of details, it was at least a suggestion of progress. Now we're moving goalposts again. We've got letters threatening new tariffs. This is not a great recipe for stocks.
Yeah, so we want to get into this further as we turn to Sarah Bianchi, who, of course, was former deputy U.S. trade representative during the Biden administration. She's now senior managing director and chief strategist of international political affairs and public policy at Evercore ISI. Sarah, welcome back to Balance of Power. It's always great to have you on Bloomberg TV and radio as we consider the shifting goalposts here and the letters that Japan and South Korea have just received that suggests August 1st, they'll face a 25% tariff unless some kind of deal can be reached by then. Do you think they see August 1st as a hard deadline, knowing it initially was supposed to be this Wednesday? What if it just keeps moving? What incentive do they have to deal with this administration?
Well, I think what is clear is that the administration is trying to send a signal to the countries where they don't believe that trade talks are going particularly well. Japan, we got some indication last week from Trump, has really gotten sideways a bit, largely because they, like South Korea, have very large percent of their imports here into the United States are actually in sectoral. They're autos, they're steel. And the administration has been really, really slow to make any concessions in that area. And I think particularly for both those countries, it is very hard to take a deal back to their people that doesn't have some relief on autos and steel. So can they get that done by August 1st? That's a tall order. But either way, I think what the president is trying to signal is that, these deals, some of them are going well, but some are a little bit slower than we think and want. And we are looking for these countries to step up their offers.
What's the message that we send every time we delay the deadline?
Well, certainly the market has gotten a bit accustomed to the president coming in very, very tough on these deals, top line and then extensions. But the reality is, in this case, I expect that tariffs are actually going to go up from here. We have more sectoral tariffs to come in pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. Some of these countries, as we saw with Vietnam, are not going to land at 10%. So if we're at a weighted average of around 15% right now, the next era we think is up. Now, I don't believe that all of these tariffs are going to go into place. And I certainly don't believe Korea or Japan is long for this world at 25%, no matter what happens. But those who think that this is all just a noise, I do think should pay a bit more close attention because, again, I think we're going to have directionally higher tariffs from where we're at right now.
Well, and Sarah, to your point, the president has signaled that even that 25% rate could go higher if either of these countries chooses to retaliate. He'll just stack their retaliatory tariff rate on top of the 25%. Do you expect that to be an adequate deterrent? How do you expect Japan and South Korea to respond to this?
Well, I think that South Korea and Japan, first of all, they're slightly differently positioned here. South Korea just elected a new government, so they're really just trying to get their arms around all of this. But look, auto, steel, semis, these are really important issues in these countries. It's very, very hard for them to cut a deal that doesn't provide some relief there. And so while I think they are taking it seriously, I think they're a little bit stuck in terms of what they need. And so really with the reciprocal rate is not their biggest, it's not their most significant part of their trade, their exports here to the United States. So I think they're going to also try to hold tough too and get everything they can out of this.
Sarah, how much of this is a message to India, knowing that the White House has really talked about these three countries, South Korea, Japan, and India, as the most likely to announce deals? We've been hearing this for weeks. Today we get letters on South Korea and Japan. Is this a message to anyone in particular?
I don't think so. I think it's really a message to those two countries that the Trump administration is not satisfied where they are in this negotiating cycle. I think they're actually much closer to India. Now, some of these countries, we talked to lots of them, the leaders and companies, they are a bit frustrated. One of the reasons it's easier for India to get a deal is they have very, very high tariffs on the United States. So it's a little bit easier for India to give. So I actually think it's a good sign for India. But look, as we've always said, these trade deals are really hard. They're, the irritants in trade relationships, whether it's an ally or not, they are there for a reason. These are hard issues. So I think the reality is cutting this many deals this fast is just challenging. It's why even with Vietnam, who was very anxious to cut a deal, we've still seen very, very few details about precisely really what it looks like.
Well, Sarah, this brings me to the president's warning to the BRICS countries that he issued overnight, suggesting that any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. We just got the head of one of those countries, President Lula of Brazil, saying BRICS wasn't built to confront anyone as he speaks to reporters at the BRICS summit currently underway in Rio. But do you have a sense of what the president might mean when he says anti-American policies?
Yeah, we saw a little bit from the administration early on where they came out talking about some currency issues on the BRICS. I think they're worried about the trading bloc generally speaking and it getting some traction. So this isn't the first time he's come out hard against them. We'll see how lasting this policy is or exactly what he's trying to drive here. It's not a major component of his trade agenda. I would say, I think a lot of these countries should be, again, focused on what's coming on sectorals, whether it's pharmaceuticals or semiconductors, and, where they land on these deals. I think what we're seeing today is a president who's feeling pretty good about of the world. The markets have been pretty good. He's obviously had an impressive legislative achievement and some foreign policy successes. So I think he's trying to kind of caffeinate this exercise, which has languished a bit. These deals have been hard to get. He's looking to get some progress.
When you consider the voices in President Trump's ears right now, based on what you've seen in these letters and the rhetoric over the past couple of days, is he listening to Navarro and Lutnick or Scott Besson?
It's always very, very hard to say. precisely who. Certainly Besson was out over the weekend. Lutnick was around. At the end of the day, it's the USTR that really has the technical skills to negotiate this. I think everybody's involved. But certainly somebody's got his attention who believes he's got some bandwidth here to be a little tough and to drive the deal he wants. Again, as we've seen, these do not always hold. It's a long way between now and August 1st, and so I'm not ready to say that everybody's going to get a high reciprocal rate. I think Vietnam did quite well for themselves. I think many other countries will as well.
Sarah, it's great to have you back. Sarah Bianchi with us from Evercore ISI. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are on the way right here only on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Countries receiving new tariff levels, or at least existing countries that we already trade with, getting levels of tariff set. We've already seen, of course, 25% for Japan and South Korea, and we're keeping an eye on what may come next, as the president has suggested about a dozen countries could ultimately be receiving letters today. But the president also is focused on matters here at home, including, of course, deploying FEMA and declaring an emergency after devastating flooding in Hill Country in Texas over the weekend that has claimed at least 80 lives, many of them children, as 27 campers and counselors have been confirmed dead at Camp Mystic in Texas, just outside Kerrville. And this is obviously a story that we're following closely here as we consider also the emergency preparedness and emergency response. We heard from the mayor of Kerrville, Joe Herring, about the tragedy over the weekend.
I need to tell my community and those families who are waiting, this will be a rough week. Primary search continues, and we remain hopeful every foot, every mile, every bend of the river.
Camp Mystic in Kerr County says it is grieving the loss now of 27 campers and counselors. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary at the White House, just now updating the death toll to 91. Up from over 80. The last time we spoke with Julie Fine, who joins us now, our Texas bureau chief, with us live from Dallas with the latest on this, having heard from this briefing and now the White House. Julie, we also have the threat of more bad weather. What are you hearing?
Well, first of all, we were told, and they have said in news conferences, that they did expect that number, sadly, to go higher. There were more than 40 people still unaccounted for as of yesterday. There are still 10 campers unaccounted for and one counselor. The weather is getting slightly better. I went through all the forecasts before I sat down here. The weather's getting slightly better, but there's just so much to deal with, and there's still a little bit of rain in the forecast later in the week. That search and recovery continues. Volunteers from all over the nation. There are federal and state resources as people continue the recovery effort. A lot ahead here, including figuring out exactly the best way to notify in the future. That will be a big focus here as the National Weather Service has gone through. The notifications went out. The question is, did people receive them? Obviously, in times like this, there is very limited internet. You're in a camp. Campers do not have their cell phones. They're going to have to figure out a much better system, obviously, moving forward. Joe and Kailey.
Well, and Julie, that's what Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, is now addressing. She's pushing back on what she describes as falsehoods around the National Weather Service, which she describes as having had done its job, that their offices in Austin, San Antonio, conducted forecast briefings for emergency management in the morning, issued flood watches in the early afternoon, executing timely forecasts. Is there any evidence at this time, Julie, that there was any staffing or other issues that could be potentially pinned on this administration in terms of the ability of these agencies to respond to the unfolding disaster?
At this point, it does not appear that there is anything specific. There have been a few people that have left due to possibly taking early retirement. But the National Weather Service has really pushed back on anything, saying the National Weather Service did its job. I do want to talk a little bit about here in Texas. There is some type of alert fatigue. I will tell you, you can get an alert almost on the daily here because of the weather, because of tornadoes. Also, one thing to note about the weather here, you can be expecting a tornado and then all of a sudden it moves 80 miles. All of this will be certainly looked at. I mean, Senator Ted Cruz saying that today, local officials saying they have to go through everything to make sure this doesn't happen again. There is a special session at the end of the month at the Texas legislature. It's not on the agenda right now. I will not be surprised if it's added and this comes up and they take a good look at emergency management notification systems.
Great reporting, Julie. We appreciate it so much. Julie Fine is our Texas bureau chief. As we keep an ear on the briefing here, we also should remind everyone that Senator Chuck Schumer is getting involved here. The Democratic leader in the Senate, Kailey, is asking the Department of Commerce's acting inspector general to look into this very idea of staffing vacancies at the National Weather Service. But it does appear, based on the briefing we heard earlier, that the alerts, as you pointed out, were delivered. Whether you see an alert at 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning remains a very different question. Something we'll get into here with our political panel, along with some other topics that we're following today. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. Jeannie is Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And, of course, Rick, our Republican strategist, a partner at Stone Court Capital. What's Chuck Schumer up to here, Jeannie? We want to be careful with this story because there is no evidence that staffing shortages led to this outcome.
That's right. He is trying to investigate if any of the cuts that we've seen to the Weather Service, whether during Biden's time, quite frankly, or during Trump's time, may have impacted what has happened in Texas. And he is right to do that. Of course, want to be very careful that you don't take resources away from recovery and helping out victims in order to do that. But it doesn't seem like that is happening. The other thing that should be looked into, quite frankly, and will certainly, is the impact of global warming on all of this and the weather we are seeing around the world and the country, which is impacting what we're seeing in places like Texas and, quite frankly, everywhere we look. And this is a Congress that should address that as well.
Well, we should also keep in mind that in addition to the actual cuts we have seen to NOAA and the National Weather Service, this is also a president, Rick, who is called for getting rid of FEMA. He wants to send essentially emergency response back to states individually, though FEMA has been mobilized to respond to what just happened in Texas. Do you expect the president to pivot on that effort?
Yeah, I think it's fair to just give a bit of a heartbeat to this issue before we've even really gotten through the recovery and phase. There are a lot of families that are wondering, why are we worrying about the weather when we have children and other members of their family at risk? Look, there's going to be a lot to talk about as a result of these kinds of really horrific situations, whether it's are we a 21st century country that can't get our, sort of weather act together? There's a lot to that puzzle that maybe some investment by the federal government could do with. And on top of that, some of these other issues on response are always going to be a case. But we need to let that response occur before we start, parsing what we're going to do about it in the future. And so I just think, with respect to the families in Texas that are affected by this disaster, that you don't want to try to over politicize it either on the right or the left at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate your sentiment there, Rick. I think we all do here. We're still searching for the missing, and I guess that's why I wonder if it was a little early for the Democratic leader in the Senate to be kicking out a letter on this.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty to do without having to try and launch investigations and second guess, why it happened. We're still dealing with what happened. And until we get a handle on that and get ahead of that curve and respectfully handle this from the family's points of view, I think Congress would be better off, trying to get some of the nation's business done before they have to tackle what's going on, in Texas today. It doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do. It's just probably, in my own view, the wrong timing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fair enough. And as we consider the spotlight that this could in the future put on efforts to trim down these kinds of response agencies, Jeannie, that is, of course, going to put a fresh spotlight on the work of the Department of Government Efficiency and on the individual who up until recently was running it, Elon Musk. I want to ask you separately, though, about an issue pertaining to Elon Musk, which is that he announced over the weekend that he's doing it, making a new party, the America Party, going to run against Republicans and Democrats. Jeannie, what kind of disruptive force could that be as we look ahead to 2026?
Yeah, Kailey, I have to tell you, I had Ross Perot vibes via the 1990s. He announced on Larry King, and, this is an announcement on X. As far as I can tell, Elon Musk has not yet done any of the administrative things he would have to do to get this party kicked off. Surely he can do that. He's talking about 2026, interesting to me, not 2028. Of course, we've not really had third parties in this country that have succeeded. And the ones that have succeeded have had a very famous person like Elon Musk or Ross Perot at the top. The difference is Elon Musk cannot run for president constitutionally. He seems to acknowledge that with a focus on 2026. And so that's what he says he's going to do, is he's going to try to create this party and impact the Congress. Of course, in doing that, he can take away from both Democrats and Republicans, depending on what this party stands for, which is not clear to me at all beyond the issue of pro-free trade, anti-spending.
Mm-hmm. Rick, we've only got about a minute left. People have approached you before to start new political parties, to launch candidacies that were outside of the Democratic and Republican circles. There's a reason why this tends not to work. What would be your answer today?
Yeah, look, we have a history of a two-party country here. The structures that we have in states and federally are geared toward a two-party system, and it's a binary outcome. There's winners and losers. When you start introducing third parties into the equation, you really start to mix up what that calculus is. Yeah, Elon Musk got plenty of money to get on the ballot. No Label got on 19 federal ballots, with, about $60-70 million. That's chicken scratchings to Elon Musk. So he can actually get there. The question is, what are the consequences of fielding candidates in a three-way race?
Mm-hmm. Well, especially for Tesla shareholders as well. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our political panel.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House for a bilateral meeting and state dinner around 6 p.m.
Caroline Levitt saying the president is still in contact with Iran on a deal, which I suspect will come up in this meeting. But this was supposed to be about a potential ceasefire with Hamas. We should know Benjamin Netanyahu on his third visit here to the White House, the only world leader who has had more than one.
Yeah, 3 visits in 6 months. So we want to get the perspective now from Natasha Hall. She's non-resident senior associate for geopolitics and the foreign policy department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Nice to see you, Natasha.
Thank you for having
Always
me.
great to have you here on Balance of Power. As we consider first, let's just take the chances of a ceasefire agreement being reached between Israel and Hamas and what the president is going to be able to do to influence that outcome tonight, knowing he last week announced that Israel had agreed to a 60-day ceasefire. Apparently, it didn't really work out the way that he may have hoped. So how can that be advanced with this visit this evening?
Well, we've been here before, many times before. And in fact, this time last year with President Biden, he had attempted something similar, basically saying Israel had already agreed to a ceasefire, only to have Netanyahu essentially say no. And so we're here again. And so I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen, what kind of leverage the president will actually apply to Netanyahu. But needless to say, billions of dollars in arms, diplomatic cover at the UN. I mean, the United States has a lot of leverage to bear if it wants to use it. And that's the big question.
When you go back to the Biden announcement, there was a subsequent Biden announcement. Remember, everyone was back to the table on that same deal. It was, I think, a 4-pronged agreement, and it began with a 60-day ceasefire. Is that still where we're starting in this conversation?
I mean, unfortunately, it does seem to be where we're starting. But this time around, because we've seen so many of these temporary ceasefires, Hamas is insisting that should there be a 60-day ceasefire, that immediately talks begin to permanently end the war, which I think is somewhat reasonable given we're nearly 2 years in right now. But it does appear that that would be the starting point.
Well, and how has Hamas's position been influenced by what we saw take place between Iran and the U.S. and Israel with the strikes we saw last month and now the truce that we are in? Is Hamas in a position to kind of hold a tough line here, or are they more in a position to be willing to negotiate or to acquiesce to some of the demands of the Israelis?
Well, it takes one look at Gaza to see that Hamas is in a very weak position. I don't think it was getting much support from Iran anyways. I think that the critical issue was whether or not these the strikes on Iran would actually lead Netanyahu to accept some kind of ceasefire deal and end to the war, some kind of plan for the day after, which Israel has been very reluctant to discuss in any kind of meaningful way. But Hamas has sort of always been there and willing to negotiate. And I think that the 3 points, the 3 sticking points that we saw over the weekend was about the very controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It was about this permanent end to the war and Israeli troop withdrawals. And so these are the issues that Netanyahu has already said are unacceptable to him. And so, it remains to be seen. We're already hearing reports from Palestinian negotiators in Qatar that Israel sees a sticking point in just the free flow of aid into Gaza right now. So we're not in a really good position, I think, for Gaza, for Hamas, for Palestinians.
I wanted to ask you about humanitarian aid, food supplies, gas, the things that are needed inside Gaza. Will that be part of a ceasefire? Because it hasn't worked out at any stage of this process to the level that we have been promised.
So this is the thing that I'm really looking for, right? If we can't even get this into Gaza, then I'm very pessimistic at this point. We're seeing famine-like conditions. Hundreds of food distribution points across the Strip were closed for this Gaza Humanitarian, Foundation for distribution points, where we've seen 600 people killed just trying to get aid. So if we can't even see that, I think we have a real problem here. And the one thing that I would say is President Trump doesn't like bad optics. So that might propel him forward to actually push Netanyahu maybe behind the scenes. But I won't hold my breath.
Well, but to that point, Natasha, characterize their relationship right now, because especially when we saw Israel moving first on Iran, a lot of people said that was Netanyahu painting President Trump into a corner, basically acting not in conjunction with him, but ahead of him and making sure that the president was forced to go along ultimately. Is that how you kind of see this playing out right now?
So the way I see it is, again, President Trump doesn't like bad optics. Gaza was bad optics. I think, U.S. stealth bombers bombing Iranian nuclear sites made him look like a strong president, made him look like he was making things happen. And now we're sort of back to square one with Gaza. And so, I think that whatever we see in the days and weeks ahead, I think for both Netanyahu and for Trump, focusing on Iran is better for them politically, domestically, internationally, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to find some kind of resolution to this war in Gaza. Otherwise, Israel's future looks pretty bleak, too. There's a number of countries waiting to normalize with Israel. But again, there's this one sticking point. And, we know that President Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. So, maybe that's the incentive at the end of the day.
Well, it certainly could be. He also wants Gaza to be the Riviera of the Middle East, as he's said, displace everyone and build condos. How do you reach a peace deal or a ceasefire with respect to the people who live there when that's your point of view?
I mean, this is the big question beyond that 60-day ceasefire, and I think that's why Hamas wants to talk about that. Because we did see reports earlier last week that there was some kind of consulting sort of assessment that dictated that anyone who was displaced, about 500,000 people from Gaza out of 2 million, would get about $9,000 per person. So, I mean, this is a serious thing that's been on the table and continues to be on the table. So, I mean, that also needs to be worked out.
Well, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, actually just addressed that question in the briefing. She says President Trump never mentioned a takeover of Gaza, but just rebuilding. So I guess perhaps it depends on how you're characterizing the Riviera of, what did he say? Riviera of the Middle East?
The Middle East, I think, was the idea.
Here. Finally, Natasha, we just have a minute left, but how heavily do you expect the question of Iran's outstanding nuclear capabilities to feature into their conversation tonight?
I think this is what Netanyahu wants to prioritize in this meeting. He wants to talk about the wins, but he also wants guarantees from the United States that if they have any kind of intelligence that Iran has continued its nuclear program covertly, that the United States will be there for them if they want to attack again. And maybe that could get Trump across the ceasefire line with Netanyahu in Gaza. But I think, again, remains to be seen, because this president has not been patient with peace deals either in Ukraine or Gaza or elsewhere. So the devil will be in the details.
That's right. Details are stubborn sometimes. In February, President Trump said that the U.S. would take over and own Gaza as part of that process.
Good reminder.
Natasha, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us today. We'll have a lot more on what comes from this visit at the White House. Natasha Hall, CSIS, and great experience and insight with us here, as always. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.